Oh, that was Night. Night. What's going on, everyone? How you
What's
all
up?
doing?
What's
There
up?
we go. There you
Welcome to the
go.
collective.
Welcome to the collective. There you go. Straight to the point. Who
How's
needs
it
an
going, man?
intro? We back. Let's go. Appreciate you.
We
What's
don't need
going
an
on,
intro.
everyone? Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you all so much for hanging out with us. Talk some Scream stuff. Talk some theories, some ideas, some rumors, some updates.
That's
People are
right.
beautiful. Uh, but yeah, Jake's not going to be able to make it today. No worries. Me and Knight will hold it down. Craven, we'll see. If not, then me and Knight will hold it down. But
Yes.
we appreciate you guys so much for being here, hanging out with us. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. You guys know the drill. Knight, now that I'm done with my stretch,
Yeah, man. You
uh,
got to stretch sometimes.
yeah, gotta get a big stretch in. It's gonna be. We got a lot of action-packed stuff here, so you gotta, gotta get limber before you dive into some extracurricular activities. So,
That's right, man.
general thoughts of what you want to see on Scream 7. But let's get right into the meat and potatoes of it. Obviously,
All
we
right.
know Scream 7 is coming, right? We
Mm-hmm.
know Sidney Prescott is confirmed to be in it.
That's right.
Everything else is kind of just rumors right now. There's rumors about Gail. There's rumors about all that stuff. We can dive into the various rumors here in a moment. But just to start, what are your general thoughts on Scream 7? What would you like to see, story wise, vision wise, whatever? What are your thoughts?
Well, the biggest thing I want is a really good story. You know what I mean? Like I really want this to kind of take it back to just a really good story with a great mystery. And I think, when you're talking about being 7 movies into a franchise, it's really hard to do that, right? Because we have huge expectations. We're very experienced with the formula, all that. So Kevin's got a lot of stress. You know what I'm saying? Because I think that for him as well, I think he wants to deliver a movie that is really going to sit well with us fans, us longtime fans. But if we can get a great story with a mystery, like when I'm sitting in that theater, I would love to have a feeling of I don't know who's doing this, or at least something that's making me wonder that I don't know, right? That would
Yeah.
be fantastic. We have Sydney, we have, probably some other legacy cast members that are going to be back, like you said, and all of that is rumor. So, and I know a lot of people have thoughts on that. We'll get to that, but the story, man, if it could just be a great story, like when I'm in that theater, I'm just really engaged. That's the thing I would love the most is a great story. And of course, Sydney coming back, if this could be a great Sydney movie, as far as like her weight is there in the film, that would be that would be fantastic. And that would be something that I think that they weren't able to do well in Scream 5.
Agreed.
So if they can pull that off, I think that that would be fantastic, man. What about you?
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, story is everything, right? Like,
Right.
you got to have a good story. And, I've expressed my disappointment in some areas with the writing for 5 and 6. I just think it could have been better. But
Right.
one of the things that I like about this upcoming Scream 7 is the mystery. I even made a video about this very thing, like the mystery, the unknown we're about to trench in. Like we know
Hmm.
Sydney's going to be in this film, but there's so many different things that they could do, right? Like
Right.
to me, and some people might disagree, but to me, I think their biggest flaw with 5 and 6 was they handcuffed themselves to the past. Where
Hmm.
if they would have just told a fresh story, and intertwined Sydney and Gail and all that stuff, but it was just kind of like it wasn't this bloodline thing, it wasn't this tie to all this other thing. It was just like, here's a fresh cast, here's kind of like what Scream 4 did, right? Fresh
Yes.
cast, fresh story, fresh everything. Sydney is integrated, then they get her involved, and like, to me it's like, do that. Let's
Hmm.
get back to basics, let's keep it
Right.
simple. You don't need this big brain complex Scream film, right? Like, just give us a new cast. Sidney Prescott, if you get Gail, if you get the band back together, let's get the band back together.
Hmm.
Then, flush out a convincing story with those characters. This could even be kind of a passing of the torch into like if you build, because one of the problems with Scream 5 too was the lack of character building.
That's
Right?
right.
Like they did a very I mean, people came around in Scream 6, but Scream 5, the consensus was like Sam was awful. And
Hmm.
then people kind of came around in Scream 6 once they kind of fleshed out her story better, and
Right.
they gave her more kind of, I guess, momentum, more things to work with. So to
Hmm.
me, it's like have your handful of characters, tell a good story, build those characters properly, so that way you can continue if you want to, right?
Right.
And then integrate Sydney, because again, in Scream 5, like they did a terrible job. Like
It was
there was
horrible.
no real point to have her in the movie. Like what did
I
she do?
know.
That was everything she did in the movie, somebody else could have done, literally. Like the only thing
That's
that
right.
was cool was like her shooting through the doors. Like that was a Sydney thing to do. And like,
Yeah.
I'm bored, right? When she closed it.
Yeah.
Those
Yeah.
are the only like real Sydney things. Outside of that, the
Hmm.
tracking thing that she did, she says in the movie that Gail, like I learned that from I learned it from Gail, right? So
Right.
Gail could put the tracker on.
That's
Everything
right.
Sydney did as far as helping to take down Ghostface, we knew Mindy was still alive. You could have had Mindy come in and be the hero and save everything, right? Like, so there
Right.
was nothing. And then same thing with Scream 6 with Gail, right? Like Gail, like what was the point of Gail in that movie? Everything
It was
she did in that
absolutely no point at all.
wasn't.
None at
You
all.
could have just not had her in the movie at all. The only thing that she did was discover the shrine
The
room. But
shrine.
Dermot Mulroney's character says it. Detective Bailey says it in the movie. He said, "Oh, she really is a good reporter or whatever. I was going
Hmm.
to stumble across it and tell you guys I found it, but she beat me to it." Right? Well,
Right.
okay. So the one thing Gail did, she didn't even need to do. Dermot Mulroney was going to do it. And like, yeah,
Yeah.
her scene was cool, taking on Ghostface and stuff, but like, it just was like, outside of that, like the Star 69 thing or whatever, right? Like that was
Hmm.
cool. Like, that was a Gail thing. It's like, yeah, she's done this enough. She gets it. But to me,
Right.
it's like, put Gail and Sydney and these characters in a good story. Keep it simple. You don't need to make it
Hmm.
complex. You need some knockoff of Scream 5, 6, and 7. Like, to me, this is a good opportunity for a fresh, clean slate. Right? Just
I agree.
here's a fresh story with some characters. Sydney and Gail are intertwined, right? It's very easy to do that. Like it's
Hmm.
not like, especially Gail. Gail doesn't need a
Right.
reason to show up. Like she wants to solve it, right? She writes books
Right.
about it, right? Like this is perfect for her. So
Exactly.
you don't need a big brain Gail Weathers. Sydney, you have to have a little bit of explaining, but like you could set it to where she's at. Like, she's in what,
Hmm.
or Portland or whatever, right? Like you
Yep.
could just have the stage set in Portland. Boom, keep it simple, keep it short, keep it to the point. Keep the things that I liked in Scream 5 and 6 that I would like to see them keep is like the darker tones.
Yeah, a little bit more intensity with
Yeah.
Ghostface, because I think that was some of the best stuff, because you weren't expecting that. I think you could keep that, and like you said earlier, the balance. The balance is so important, because I think the balance was off in 5, and then by the time you get to 6, it's kind of like, well, Sydney's not there, and Gail didn't need to be in the movie, and Kirby didn't either. And I love Kirby.
Kirby made
They could have done some great
Even her
stuff with
story
Kirby, and they
didn't make
didn't.
sense. Even her story didn't make sense. Like
Exactly.
there, like it's just I don't know. Again, like, and I know people I get comments all the time. They're like, "You're so critical of the writing," but it's like, what am I supposed to do? Pretend like it was great writing? Like, am I supposed to
Right.
just lie? Like,
Right.
no, I'm
You
supposed
have
to.
to
Oh
call
yeah,
it you
you
have to
have to
call
be
it like you
honest.
say it. You have to call it like you
Otherwise, we're
see
just
it.
gonna keep doing it. If fans just keep abiding by and just say, it's fine, that's okay. Yeah, you're right. That really didn't make sense. Then guess what they're gonna do? They're gonna think, oh, everyone likes it. Let's just keep doing it. But if
Mhm.
if you hold people accountable, guess what? Now they can make the changes. They can make the progress. Guess what? You saw progress from Scream 5 and 6. Why?
Mhm.
Because fans held them accountable. We didn't
Right.
like how you portrayed Sam. We didn't like the story with Sam. Guess what? Scream 6, the consensus was, man, Sam was really great. Hopefully
Yeah,
she sticks
she was
around.
great.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
so I mean, you get on these people, you call it out. Guess what? They're gonna notice. They're listening. If there's enough noise, they're gonna, some random YouTubers like us just are the only ones saying it. Then guess what? They're not gonna really know. But if
Right.
like community is like, no, like, hey, we need to correct this. Guess what? They're gonna correct it. And
Yep,
so
I
my thing
agree.
is just like, like I'm all, I've said I want them to move off of the Sydney story, but I understand given the circumstances,
Hmm.
right? We don't need to go into the whole Melissa Barrera thing. I know we've all said that enough on our thing, but just keeping it
Right.
what it is, like, given the circumstances, I get you're kind of in a rock and a hard place. Your only real two options are start completely fresh and just have a whole new cast and do everything. But then you run the risk of like people kind of just going like, what is that? But if you add Sydney, right now you have that box office draw, you have the Scream, the Scream Queen, literally, and you can kind of build a story around her and then have the passing of the torch, or you can expand that story more if it hits and it's a good story. So I get
Hmm.
why they need to have Sydney in it, and I'm fine with it given the circumstances. But you gotta have a point. If she's just in the
Right.
movie completely pointless, like Scream 5, we didn't even get a reaction to Dewey's death. We didn't like there were so many things, so many missed opportunities with Sydney in that story. Like
Yep.
we didn't know like who is she now? Man,
Hmm.
it's been how many years? Been 2011. So you're
Hmm.
talking at that point, it was like 11 years or whatever since the last Scream film. Like, where is she in her life? How is she? Yes, we got that she has kids. We got
Hmm.
that she's married to a guy named Mark, right? Like,
Hmm.
but if it wasn't for like Scream fans made that connection, but you think the casual audience were like, oh, Mark Kincade. Oh, that's cool.
Well,
No, the casual audience were probably like, okay, who's Mark? Like,
exactly. Well, the thing of it too is that like when you think about the character arc as well, it's so jarring when you see what they had for her as a character in 4 and then what they had her do in 5. Now, I know some people will say, okay, well, she's older, she's hardened, kind of like Dewey was and so forth, and that's fine, but you can't you still have to have the character be the character that we enjoy, or
yeah,
why even have the character in the friggin' movie? Because like you said, she's like, we don't know who she is. She's just kind of like, yeah, okay, hey, she didn't really have that type of reaction that you would think she would have with Dewey dying. And that was a missed opportunity. It was a missed opportunity to have them all three in at least a scene or two.
yeah, at
Like
least
there's
one
there's a
scene.
lot of things that they could have done differently. I mean, it's the same thing they friggin' did with Star Wars. But when you think about 4, and Kevin is really smart. So I have some faith and I have some
Yeah,
hope, because in Scream 4, you said this earlier, balance. That is a movie that has great balance. You have the old cast and you also have the new characters, Jill, Kirby, Charlie, all those guys. And it was a storyline that worked to the advantage of both sides. Sydney was very focal. She was important. She had great scenes. She had great emotional scenes. You had Gail that's investigating. Remember when she said, okay, I'm going to go rogue, and she's actually using her wits, and she's,
you
trying
got
to
to know who
get.
the characters were. Like, you
Yes.
got to know who the characters. Like,
Yes.
Scream 5 and 6 did a terrible job of getting us to know who the characters are,
Right.
right? Like
Right.
Scream 4, even like Scream 1 was like a clinic and masterpiece, but like Scream
Yes.
4 did a good job. Sydney wasn't even the main character in that movie. It was
Right.
Jill. The whole
Right.
story was around Jill. But if you watch that movie and you're a fan of Sydney, you felt like that story was centered around Sydney. You felt
That's
like it
right.
was a Sydney story. Sydney, yes, tied into the motive and everything like that, but
Hmm.
it was just incidental, right? Like she was just
Right.
on her push. She was trying to, you saw the progression in her character. She went from this like, wet behind the ears high school girl that's just, going through tragedy, trying to navigate life, to like
Hmm.
her in this like place of distrust and chaos, to her having a full-blown like mental breakdown and
Hmm.
seeing ghosts of her dead mother and like just
Right.
completely like delusional to a point, to where you're like, it keeps you guessing till like, okay, I'm done with that chapter of my life. It's time to move on. I'm stepping out
Hmm.
of darkness, like
Right.
doing this book, telling about my life, stepping out. Gail, you see Gail as like a complete, 180 of her, right? She goes from
Hmm.
being this like gun ho reporter, like, I'll slit throats if I have to, whatever, to like, she's a stay at home housewife, to the deputy of the
In a little
small,
town.
yeah, in this little town, and she's like struggling to get by.
Bored.
Yeah, because she's just losing her mind, right? Like
That's
you. like you got to see the. Go ahead, sorry.
No. I was just gonna say, and that's the thing about Gail is that it was a very interesting character arc for her because now you took away those things and she's trying to deal like inside with
Yeah,
that struggle. And I was thinking, and I'll let you finish your point too. But I was thinking that would have been something so cool to see them carry over into 5 and then into 6. It's like and they kind of touched upon it a little bit. I will give them credit a little bit when Sam and Tara, when they were, basically saying, without Ghostface, what are you? Right? Like that's man, they could have had a whole movie just about Gail herself struggling with the fact of, is that all she is? Is that her identity? These tragedies, these murders, and
but
getting the
she can't
story.
even, she doesn't even know what she's supposed to write. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
she has the scene where she's like, I don't know what the f I'm doing or whatever, right?
right.
Like, yeah,
Exactly. Like they could
it,
really do some cool stuff with her as a character, and we all know that Courtney Cox could pull that off. So again, basically, it's like we said right from the beginning: characters,
yeah,
story. Make these characters be what they have been in the past, way back in the past, and what they could still be. That's the thing. It's like we're not dealing with characters that we've just met. These are characters that we've been around for 30 years. You know
yeah.
what I mean? So it's like, anyways, I'm going to be
It's
interested to see what they do.
Yeah, it's the progression, right? If you're gonna have these
Hmm.
characters, we want to see and understand where are they at their points in the life.
Yeah.
Like they basically changed everything from Scream 4, but they
Hmm.
didn't give us anything as to how, when, where, why. It was
Right.
just like, oh, Dewey and Gale are no longer together, right? And then you get this like brief overlay of like, oh, they went to New York, Dewey couldn't hack it, and he left. It's like,
Yeah.
isn't that kind of the opposite of what Dewey is? Like, isn't the whole
Right.
point Dewey sticks by, right? Like Dewey stands by. Like Gail
Yeah.
changed entirely who she is for Dewey, right? I
Hmm.
mean, even going back to Scream 3, where
Hmm.
she's like, where she talks about her distaste for Woodsboro, and like, she's like, I stayed with you while you were healing, right? Like,
Hmm.
but days felt like years in Woodsboro, right?
Yeah.
And then she still sacrifices to be with Dewey, who was
Hmm.
always the guy that put Gale and Sydney before himself. And
That's
now you
right.
change that character entirely to where now he's
Hmm.
like Howard. And like, I get the point was like he's coming back to his, John Wayne moment where it's like, all right, I betrayed everyone. Let me kind of redeem myself. But it just didn't fit the arc of Dewey. You didn't see
Hmm.
that progression and downfall. The last thing we saw of
Right.
Dewey, he was the hero. He was the sheriff. He was the guy in this town. Yes, Gale was dealing with the struggles. Even if you wanted to break them up, it would have made more sense for Gale to say, I can't stand Woodsboro no more. I'm leaving, because
Right.
that was character progression in Scream 4. But they just
Exactly.
completely, it's like they just didn't know that existed. And they just went and they
Hmm.
made they made what Gale's character was Dewey.
Yeah, they flip flopped it.
It didn't make sense. It
Hmm.
was like, if you've watched the franchise, this makes zero sense. That's not who Dewey's
Right.
character is. That was who Gail's character was, because she already did it in between 2 and 3. We know that,
Right.
again, if you follow the franchise. But
Hmm.
it's just those like little things, like, I want them to get back. And my hope is with Kevin Williamson that'll be the case, because
It's gotta be.
who knows it better than Kevin? Nobody. He's
Exactly.
literally
Look,
he
I would
created
tell you
it.
what, and I've said this too on my videos. If we can't get great characters under Kevin, then we're in big trouble, man,
Yeah.
because he is so good with character development. He's so good with character interaction, right? Because especially if you look at those first 4 films, I can name several scenes in each film where there's fantastic moments of
Yeah.
characters just interacting with each other, and it's just great chemistry, right? And that's what makes these films so much fun, is that you latch onto these characters. And like you said, in 5, it was just totally like so unbalanced. 6 was better, but and I also said this when 6 came out. I think 6 also had the advantage of building up from 5. In other
Yeah.
words, it's like 6 as a movie, it took a movie and a half for us to get that chemistry, whereas 1, 2, 3, and 4 stood on their own. Like each of those films you had that character interaction and chemistry. But let me just throw something out here too, because I know these guys in the chat, they've been talking about, and of course, we know about the rumors of Courtney Cox, but also about Patrick Dempsey.
Yeah.
And let me just throw this out there with Jen, and then I'll get your take on it too after I say something. Jen says the reasons that Kincade is sus. His main goal was to get Sydney to Hollywood. He used Dewey's phone, and then Sydney got the call from Ghostface. He never killed or captured Ghostface, and he was never really wounded either. Now, I love Patrick Dempsey, and I think that he's a really great actor. I think the character was fun in 3, but here's my opinion. Then tell me what you think, Fate. If they have Mark Kincade as a Ghostface killer or anything that is whack, I'm gonna be calling a little bit of BS on that. It's like you're with Sydney for years. You have a family. It's like that would to me, anyways. I'm just saying, to me, it would make zero sense. Even if they said, okay, like one day he snapped and showed his true colors or whatever. I mean, I suppose maybe, I don't know, maybe that'd be watchable. But if Kincade is anything nefarious, I'm just gonna be like, come on, guys, let's not stretch this to unbelievability. What do you think?
So I mean, you're spot on. Like, my thing is that, like, okay, if this, and I've talked about this on my channel, is like, it depends on where this movie's going to take place, right? The
Right.
assumption is that this takes place right after Scream 5 and 6, or maybe in
Right.
between, something like that, whatever. If
Right.
it does, then yes, it makes zero sense, because now you're talking like literally like 20 years, 25 years
Right.
in between
He could
their.
have killed her 1,000 times, man. It is in her sleep.
He has family, he has everything, and now he's just what, for like insurance money or something? Like,
You're
what?
right.
Why is he like? What's the point now, right? But
Right.
something I've suggested is like, what if this takes place after Scream 3? What if this takes
There you
place
go.
after Scream 4? Something like that. But even Scream 4, see, and this is the problem with Scream 5 and 6, is they handcuffed themselves to the past, but they left out so many details, right? Like,
Right.
for example, in Scream 4, Sydney and Mark were never mentioned to be together.
That's right.
Like, so all of a sudden you fast forward to Scream 5, and they're married and have kids and all this stuff. Okay, fine, but you just, again, you brushed over all of it. So now if you
Yes.
pick that back up and you have that be now, it just doesn't make sense, other than they're just a happy couple living their best life, right? Like, and this is another point. But if you were to pick this up after Scream 3, you could do and get away with a ton now.
Yes, you
And
could.
I think you could use that as like, okay, well, hey, Roman was the only killer in Scream 3. Maybe Mark Kincade was involved, right? The entire time, and that was the play, right? Mark Kincade gets knocked out, so that way he can be the alibi or whatever. But then when he comes to, guess who's dead? Roman. So he just is like, hey, it is what it
Yeah.
is. Right? Nobody
Right.
knows. Nobody. There's no evidence. There's no nothing.
No harm, no foul.
Yeah, no harm, no foul,
Yeah.
right? Let me just be done. If you did something like that, to where now Kincade wants to get involved and wants to, like, okay, like, this takes place, say, a year or whatever after, and like maybe Kincaid's been working on a plan to get Sydney again, then sure, that could make sense. They're not married, they're not together, whatever. Then sure, you could do something like that.
Right.
I still
Right.
think it'd be a little bit of a stretch, but you can make it
Yeah.
make sense. But if this is going to be a continuation, there's just no way you can have Mark Kincade as the killer. It would make zero sense. Like,
Yeah.
so
I mean, because that's the thing though, because and I know these guys, like Val was saying, if you can entertain the fact that Stu would wait this long to get revenge, you'd have to entertain that Mark would also wait that long. I mean, I think, look, here's the thing
huge
for
difference,
me.
bro. Huge
Huh?
difference. There's a
Yeah,
huge
because
difference.
right, because Stu has, first of all, Stu is crazy. Stu obviously has the motive against Sydney. And if they, and we'll talk about that too, I'm sure. But if they were to bring him back, I mean, there's 1,000 different ways that you could show why he waited that long. Maybe it was a master plan. Maybe there were some things where he was in the background. Maybe he was kind of like that, mafia boss or whatever type of thing in the background and just trying to pull strings. So I could see that. But again, if it's Mark, bro, it's like, you look. you're a bad Ghostface killer because you've had a lot of opportunities. I'm sure Sydney's had sick days. She's had times when she's been, So I'm just saying, I
Intimate
just think it would be
intimate
too much of a
moments, all
stretch.
kinds of things. Like
Yeah,
literally,
I think it'd be too much of a stretch with that.
yeah. That's I'm with you, right? Like I mean, obviously everyone knows how I feel about the whole Stu thing, and we could dive into the Stu thing in a moment because I know a lot of people are talking about it. But like
Hmm.
the thing is that like with Stu, there's no like love connection, right?
Right.
And you can make that story if you had to. I still think it's a stretch, but still, like you can make that story make a little more sense. Where Mark,
Hmm.
again, like the fact that they're married, right? Like, why did it take all this time? Even if it was something where he was waiting, I saw somebody say, like, oh, Mark was waiting for Stu. Oh, Jen said Mark was waiting for Stu's reveal. Like,
Hmm.
why? Like, if the
Hmm.
whole plan is to kill Sydney, right? You're gonna wait 25 years to do so. You're gonna have kids with the woman. You're gonna do all this stuff. Like I understand getting close, but
Hmm.
like if it was like a year or it was something like where like Billy, like that'd be like Billy waiting 25 years to execute his plan. It'd be like
Right. Exactly.
stupid. But
Right.
like with Billy, yeah, it was like a year,
A
but
year.
it was a purpose, right? He
Yep.
wanted to do it on the anniversary in which he killed the mother. Right. So
Right.
it was like, there's a plan. There's this long draw. What's the plan after 25 plus years? Like
Right.
maybe she dies of aging before she died before I get her? Like, what's
Now
the plan?
here's one thing. Now,
Yeah.
if they were to do something where they show that he had some knowledge of something, like in
Yeah.
three, if he had some knowledge of maybe Roman's relationship to Sydney or something like that, where it's kind of like it throws a little bit of drama in between them, that's one thing that I could see is okay, well, that makes sense. He held it from her because he was still doing the investigation, and then he had feelings for her, and then he fell in love with her, and then he was just like, well, I'm just never going to tell her that, and it's revealed that he knew that. Okay, now I can see that because that makes perfect sense. And it puts a little shade on him. They could have a little bit of a rift between them. And then, of course, for Nev and for Patrick, they can have something to work
Yes.
with as actors, some really heavy scenes. And that's not necessarily a bad idea either, because that's one thing they also have to show us in this film, if Patrick Dempsey is back, is a little bit of weight to their relationship, because we've never seen that, right? The most
Yeah.
that we saw was at the end of three, when he's like, come on in, the movie's about to start, and that, and that's really cool. So they will have to give us or at least I think they should, if Patrick's going to be in it, because why else should he even be in it? But give us some sense of their relationship with each other, as a husband and a wife. So to me, I think the best that they could do, as far as making him a little bit shady or throwing some sus on him or whatever, is maybe he had some information that he withheld from Sydney. It was quote unquote in her best interest or whatever.
Yeah.
Other than that, like I said, man, you said it, 20 years, bro. That's a long time. So I just think that they'd be better served for something else, as far as a red herring or an ultimate reveal of a ghost face.
Yeah. I think you just have him be a red herring, or like you said, there's some information or something that
Right.
ties in. Just again, unless this is picking up after like Scream 3 or something,
Hmm.
then which I don't mind. I wouldn't hate it. I know people don't want the timelines and stuff like that, but like,
Right.
like as long as it's not doesn't get like crazy I mean, Scream 4 is and always kind of will be its own thing,
Yeah,
right?
I
And
agree.
none of the other movies really connect to it. So it is kind
Hmm.
of like almost its own timeline thing, right? Like,
Hmm.
because it doesn't have like necessarily direct tie-ins to 3 outside of Sydney's coming out of her shell and
That's right.
Dewey and Gale are together. But outside of that, it's like what connections were there really to Scream 3,
Hmm.
right? Or
Hmm.
2 or any of them, right? And then Scream 5 basically ignored it entirely outside of Judy Hicks. Judy Hicks is the only like connection. But then she
Right.
has where was her kid in Scream 4? Like, there's just so many different like things. So I don't hate that idea, but I don't know. Again, just storytelling, right? Storytelling.
It is storytelling, man. And like you brought it up earlier, and these guys in the chat are talking about, it's going to be interesting. Val was saying it's going to be interesting to see where in the timeline they put this movie. Personally speaking, I just think that I just think that it's cleaner, you know, if it's forward, you know what I'm saying, after 6. Because if you go before 5, well, I mean, that's cool because of course that means Dewey is alive, but you're talking about a lot of years as far as where in the story they're talking about and the age of the actors, you know what I'm saying? And it's like I just think it would just be cleaner if we go after 6. Gail got attacked. She survived. Who knows, man? That they could do some really cool stuff with Gail. Maybe she has
I
some
think
some PTSD or something, you know, or whatever.
so. I actually think the cleanest would be after Scream 3. Now,
Okay.
because you could do a couple things, right? So one, you could keep the Kincade and Sydney storyline, right?
Mhm.
And pick up, yes, it would be 25 years from Scream 3, but we've seen lots of movies. I mean, H2O, right? Like even the recent
True.
Halloween, like there could be a gap. And the beauty of Ghostface is like it's not a Michael Myers that is waiting in prison to break out or anything. Like there could be any
Yeah.
reason at any point for any time, right? But also, like what you could do is you could even, if you wanted to, have like Sydney's kids, right? For
Mhm.
between like say she had kids, Mark Kincade and her, and you could easily explain it. Mark Kincade and her after the event Scream 3 made a connection, kept in touch, fell in love. It took a couple years, because Sydney's not very trusting, right? Took
Mhm.
a couple years. All of a sudden, 5, 6 years in, her and Mark Kincade have a kid or
Mhm.
two kids or whatever, and they would be right around 17, 18 years old in high school, right? You could do, and that could be the target, right? You could do like a Sydney's kid type thing if you wanted to, or you know, we could dive into it if you want the Stu thing, right? If you wanted to do the Stu thing, Stu would make more sense after Scream 3, like because you could
Mhm.
just explain him where it's like all this other time, right? All these other events and all these other movies and all these other interactions with Sydney and stuff like that. It's just like, where does it make sense? Where Scream 3, at least storyline wise, you're not that far removed. You're not that
Mhm.
far disengaged. So if you want to do the
Right.
Stu, I think you pick up after Scream 3. Also, you could pick up with after the events of Scream 3, right? You could have if you wanted to go Mark Kincade as the killer, you could do it. I mean, still it'd be 25 years, still make it would be rough. So I
Right.
still don't like the idea, but it would time wise or continuity wise would make more sense. But to me, you could have like Roman, you have an easy time. Roman worked alone, or did he?
Mhm.
Right? Now, why did it take 25 years? Sydney goes and, F's off into the middle of nowhere. So you got to track her down and find her.
Now,
Right? Like,
are we discounting 5 and 6 if we do that? Is that how
I
you're
would,
looking at it?
yeah, I
Okay. Like a
basically
new
just,
timeline.
yeah. So
Yep.
basically,
Okay.
four is kind of its own thing. Like
Yeah.
it always has been. Four
Right.
is always, and it always probably will be. Four is going to be its own thing. 5 and 6 are like its own duo, right? Like that's its
Yeah.
own thing. And then you have basically 1 through 3. You pick up after 3, and then
Mhm.
you have so many different
Yeah, if they do
possibilities,
that.
and you could just continue the Sydney storyline. And
Mhm.
because continuity wise, you don't have all the other convolutedness from the other films that you got to kind of explain or overlook or whatever. It's just clean. Like
Mhm.
Sydney, last time we saw Sydney, she was, effed off in the middle of nowhere,
Right.
dealing with mental stuff. Right?
Mhm.
She overcomes that, right? Because you see that in symbolism at the end of Scream 3, where she
Right.
leaves the
Leaving
door
the
open,
door open.
stuff like that. Like, hey, she's not scared anymore. Her and
Right.
Kincaid and Dewey and everybody are there, which means you could easily pick up, and they're all still together. They're all still friends. You don't even have to do Dewey and Kincaid are in a relationship. You could just have that they're friends, like they're
Mm.
good, like whatever. You could do so many different things. I just think continuity wise, with a Sydney story, it would just
Mhm.
make more sense. And then like why after 25 years, there could be a million reasons, right? Like I said, you
Mhm.
could do the Sydney has a daughter thing, and you could just keep it simple and kind of go back that like, hey, kind of do like the Scream 4 storyline in a sense where it's like, but it's Sydney's daughter, where it's like,
Mhm.
Scream 4 and 5, where it's like, the maybe it's the boyfriend or whatever wants to make Sydney the new Sydney, right? Or Sydney's
Mm.
daughter the new Sydney or something. I mean, I
Mhm.
don't necessarily like that idea, but I mean, again, like you could flush out a good idea, right?
Yeah,
Like,
you could. I mean, there's a
if,
lot of different ways they could do it.
well, especially if it's just some like random independent killer. Now, if you're getting Patch Dempsey or Matthew Lillard or whatever to return and be the killer, now it becomes convoluted. Now it becomes crazy because it's like, where have they been all this time, right? But
Mhm,
if it's
mhm.
just 25 years later, new characters, new story, Sydney's the target, Sydney's the time. Why is Sydney the target? Because she's Sydney Prescott, and every killer she's the white whale for every Ghostface, right?
Mhm,
Like every
mhm.
Ghostface one. Like you don't really need an explanation for why they want to kill Sydney, right? Like
Mhm.
they all want to just be the first person to kill Sydney Prescott, right?
Right.
Or well, technically 5 other Ghostface tried before
And it
me
failed.
and failed. Like I'm going to be the one to do it, and I have a direct tie-in because I'm dating her daughter.
Mhm,
Boom.
mhm.
I have dated
Right.
her daughter for the last 2 years. I'm at her house. She trusts me. We hang out. Like she drops me off to my soccer games or whatever. Right?
Mhm.
Oh, right. I'm building the established relationship with Sydney. I have her vulnerable, and then boom, I can strike. Right? Like
Yeah.
you could easily have that be done.
It could, man. I mean, I think, and and what lies beneath was saying, I don't know, man, that's too messy. I would just have it take place after 6. I think that and look, if they did this going after one of the sequels or like 3 and they start their new timeline, this this would change the whole identity of the franchise, and
Which
it opens up a lot of different possibilities, like you said, which is cool, but it's almost like, okay, now we're into Halloween territory. Now we can have as many timelines as we want. We can retcon anything that we want, which is, there's a certain
I
creative
don't think
freedom in that.
But hang on,
Was
real
that?
quick to touch on the point. But there's a huge difference between that. Halloween did that on its own will, on its own volition,
Yeah,
right? Like they just wanted to keep remaking it because it's Michael Myers, right? So you
right.
you kind of don't have a choice but to retcon and go back. Now with Ghostface and Scream, if you retconned it 4, 5, and 6, you're retconning it because it was out of your control, right? And
Yeah.
like I get what Lives Beneath says that it would be too complicated. It wouldn't. If anything, it's more complicated now. Because think of all the stuff that they have to explain. You have basically 3 movies in the middle of this franchise now that don't make sense, don't add up, that are going
Hmm.
to be either completely ignored, which if you're going to
Hmm.
completely ignore it, then you might as well just retcon them anyway, or you're going to have
Mm.
some direct tie-ins. But how do you have direct tie-ins when none of the core characters in those previous films are all going to be in this movie?
Yeah.
Like, how do you have that connection? So either A, you're having this take place after when those characters are removed, right? Just to keep continuity's sake. But then there's a ton of questions as to why and how did we get to this point, and why isn't this killer going after the core 4? Why aren't the core 4 coming and help Sydney like Sydney went and helped them? Like, there's
Hmm.
just so many holes that now you can start poking in. Where if you
Right.
just, hey, 4, 5, and 6 were its own thing. We're going to pick up after Scream 3. There is no confusion. There is no conflict. It's a smooth, simple, easy story. Right?
Unless, and I talked about this in one of my last videos, unless they take the route where they just totally narrow this story, like which I think could be a good thing, like narrow it, keep it simple. If Gail comes back and if Patrick comes back, then the ghost face attack is really centered around them and all the other cast members that they would have. Assuming that they're not gonna, you know, bring back, well, they don't need to bring back Kirby. But anyways, so if they have something where Sydney, her family is attacked, you know what I mean, or threatened or what have you. So that takes care of Sydney and Mark. And then of course, if Gail is also attacked, maybe while she's recovering or something, maybe that's something that they use to blackmail Sydney. You know what I'm saying? So if they did something like that where the story is really focused on them, then they don't have to explain where the core 4 is because they have nothing to do with that. And
Yeah,
if
but they
Kirby's not in it, you don't have to
wouldn't they
explain
come
that either.
wouldn't they come and help Sydney though? Like
But what if
Sydney
they
and
didn't
Gail,
know? What if
like
they didn't know?
Gail or Sydney or somebody couldn't pick up the phone and call?
Well,
Like,
I mean, it
hey,
could be it
you know
it
what I
could be
mean?
the
Like,
type of thing where, they could say, look, if they're going after Sydney, and they're keeping this really simple. They could be the type of thing where it's like, look, if you call for, help or whatever, your kids are going to be killed or whatever, we're going to kill Gail. She's still recovering. They show some type of footage that they're surveilling her, whatever. I don't know. It could be something like that where she's forced to not have. And I don't even know if
Just
Sydney
want
would
to
even
call the cops.
call Sam and Tara.
You know what?
I don't even know if Sydney would want to call Sam and Tara out. I don't think in 5 they showed enough of a connection between them. I mean, yeah, Sydney was like, yeah, you're gonna make it. I know what it's like, and that was cool. But and of course, that was a weakness of 5. Is I don't think they really established a strong connection between Sydney and Sam and Tara.
Well,
They
'cause
damn sure
the
don't have
problem
a
is
big
in
connection
Scream
with the
6,
twins.
but the problem is in Scream 6, Sam specifically asked, "Well, what
Where's
about
Sydney?
Sydney?"
Right.
Yeah, and like expecting Sydney to come, and Gail was the one that was like, "No, like,
Right.
hey, no, she's living her life, she's doing her thing." So obviously, that means they have some type of connection, they have some type of relationship where
Hmm.
there is like she expected Sydney to come and help,
Yeah.
right? Or at least Sydney have some type of information about this situation. And this is my point. There's so many things that they handcuff themselves to that they
Mm.
either have to explain or completely ignore. If you're just going to completely ignore everything, then you might as well just erase those films from the current timeline and just stay on the Sydney timeline. Right. So now you
Hmm.
have the Sydney. This is the Sydney timeline. This is that. Right. Because again, Sydney might as well not even have been in Scream 5. She wasn't in Scream 6. So it's not
Right.
like it's really only one movie you have to kind of just forget about.
Hmm.
But everyone's done that about Scream 4 anyway. So
Hmm.
yeah, and nobody's like, oh man, I really wish, Scream 5 and 6 had direct ties into Scream 4. Like the only connection is Kirby,
Kirby,
right? And then Judy in Scream
Judy,
5.
and 5.
There
Yeah.
was no carryover from Scream 4 about her character. She's just, other than like she's now the sheriff, right? Like other than that, like there was no like story building with her, other than like she randomly has a kid, right? So like to me, it's just like just leave everything alone, just ignore it all, and just have this be a new story carrying over with Sydney. And then I
Hmm.
just think it's more cleaner, right? I just think it becomes more convoluted if it's that. And
Hmm.
then like let's do like where like you can't even do I mean you can, but it doesn't make sense. You can't even do like a simultaneous like while they're getting attacked by Ghostface in New York, Sydney's being attacked by Ghostface and whatever, which people have thrown out. Because again, Gail says she talked to Sydney and Sydney's fine and living her best life and she didn't want to get her involved. So
Hmm.
would it Sydney call Gail and be like, hey, Ghostface is, attacking me? Oh, really? Ghostface? There would be some type of conversation in that sense, right? So it's
Hmm.
just like, again, it just, like, how do you make it not
Messy.
confusing? Yeah, exactly. How do you make it not
Hmm.
messy by just continuing after 5 and 6? Because they handcuff themselves,
Hmm.
right?
Now,
So
now, if you were to take a guess, do you think that that's going to be the plan that they would start?
100%. They're just gonna no. They're just gonna pick up after Scream 6, and they'll either ignore or I mean we already have the sample size in Scream 5 and 6, right?
Yeah.
Like all the things that they've brushed over, all the things that they've ignored, all the things that they like pretend didn't happen, like to
Hmm.
fit their story and their narrative, right? So like I fully am expecting this to be like I don't here's the thing. I think what this will be is
Hmm.
is almost like its own beginning, right? Like almost like they did retcon it, but they didn't, right?
Yeah.
Maybe there's like a mention or a reference, but they're just gonna completely like Sam and Tara, no mention, no reference, no nothing. That's why a lot of
Hmm.
people are like, oh, Judy Greer. Like a lot of people think Judy Greer is going to be in this film, right? Because there was
Hmm.
that like rumor going around that
Yeah.
somebody from Halloween is in this film. So
Right.
right, and people are like, "Oh, Leslie Mocker, Judy Greer could be Leslie Mocker." I don't think they're going to do that because now they have to explain and dive in, and they have to have the connection to that, and like and then not just that, but wouldn't she want revenge on Sam and Tara because they were the indirect result of her son being killed and stuff? Again, I don't see them because now you got to make all those tie-ins, and you have to explain why the core four aren't there, right?
Right.
Where if you just, hey, that is what it is. This is a Sydney story. We got new characters, we got new cast. They're going through their thing, but Sydney is involved, and it's just this intermingling of the new characters and Sydney, and boom, there you go. And I just think they kind of pretend like 5 and 6 didn't happen. Yeah, I think that there'll be little mentions, little references. So I think that they'll retcon it. They'll retcon it without retconning it. It'll just, they'll keep elements of Scream 5 and 6, like Mark Kincade and Sydney are married. They have kids, right? They'll keep like little elements, but it's just gonna be its own thing. Like it'll be. I will be pretty surprised if this has some tie-in, like directly into Scream 5, because you can't do it simultaneously. Because if you watch Scream 6, then you have the details as to where Sydney and what's going on with Sydney, which you think that there would be some relay that, like, hey, Sydney's being attacked right now. Oh, we are too, whatever. So like that wouldn't really make sense, right? So like my only thing is like you have to basically pick this up. But to me, if you're just gonna if you're just gonna brush it over and you're just gonna pretend like none of it happened, then you might as well just do that, right? Embrace that, pick it up on its own thing and do its own thing. I don't know. I'm not. If you're gonna do it, just do it. Is my thought.
I mean, I agree with you though. I don't know if they would pull the trigger on that. I mean, it would be like you said, it would definitely open up and clean up what they have to do for these characters. Because again, there's a lot they're gonna have to mow through to make it work if they're after 6. But I just don't know, man. I just don't know if they would do that. But I will say this: whatever they do decide to do, they have to have that intensity with Ghostface, and we gotta have multiple killers, man. We gotta have, for me, we gotta have at least 3. That's what I'm thinking. We gotta have at least 3. That would be fun to that would be fun to see. I don't want them to go back down to 1 or 1 and an invisible partner. I don't want to see that. But no.
Real quick and then we can move off of subjects, but Blucka says, I mean, if you can blame Sam for Vince's death, the same logic would apply to Sydney, as there wouldn't be a Ghostface without Sydney. Yeah, but that's kind of my point too, though, is that, like, I mean, you can make logic as to why they're attacking Sydney, but you'd also have, like, my thing is, like, why would she only want to get rid of Sydney and not want to get rid of Sam? Also, when Sam is part of the problem too. Sam is the bloodline to Billy. Sam is, indirectly involved. Like, maybe she's like, oh, I'm going after them next, but you know that they're never coming back, right? So, like, how do you explain that? How do you make that make sense? Like, my whole thing is, like, I just don't know if you can do that. It's just, I don't know. I would just, like, I guess Christina maybe would make a little more sense. Like, you could have her blame, like, she's not going to go after her own kids, right? So, like, you could have her, like, Christina Carpenter could make a little more sense, right? Where she blames Sydney for everything and she goes after Sydney. But then again, like, you're tying it in the core 4, and it's like, at some point, wouldn't we want to see Sam and Tara find out that their mother became a Ghostface and tried to kill him?
Yeah.
Like, at some point we're gonna need to get that. Like, I don't get how you make it make sense. Like, again, I mean, creative writing is a big thing, but I don't know.
It is, man. They got to make sure that they do a good job of the writing. Val saying 2 to 3 Ghostface killers is a must. But Julie says, I think I'd be okay with 1 killer. I'm gonna tell you what. Again, execution is everything. We've said that a million times, here and on our own channels. But I just don't know if I could see. Well, let me put it to you this way: assuming that we've got Sydney, we've got Mark, we've got Gail, and we've got a new cast. I just don't know if how believable it is. Like, that was the thing about Scream 3 that always kind of irked me. Even when I remember when I first saw the movie, I'm like, wow, bro is working hard. You know what I mean? Like, he's like everywhere all at once. So I just don't know if at this point in the franchise, if that would be the way to do it. Now, assuming if we're coming after 6, the other thing about it too is, yes, we've got to kind of gloss over the Carpenter sisters, or the core four, but we've seen that there is a cult. We've seen that there is a cult. It was alluded to in 5, and they showed it in 6. So it's like, I don't know, man. One killer. Do you think that one killer? I mean, it could work, right? Execution is what it's all
Yeah.
about. But would you want to see just one?
No, because I don't think you could do the cool stuff that you could do with multiple killers, right? Because
Yeah.
the problem with Scream 3 and there being one killer was that a lot of the kills and just the way things lined up just didn't make sense.
Right.
And the way like Roman literally teleports in that movie,
Yeah.
it just doesn't make sense because we
Right.
know it would have if there were multiple killers. But as soon as you find out that there's only one killer, you're like, okay, well, and you go back and watch that movie, you're just like, half these scenes don't make sense. Right? Like the person clearly gets away and then Ghostface just magically appears, but we know that they were, like, how does Roman play dead while people are getting chased by Ghostface and he's just laying there for who knows how long, and he put the makeup on himself and like
it takes time to do that. It's like, how is he working his timetable? It's like,
where is he getting all this time from? And he has a wizard, Harry. Like, it's one of those things. Like, so to me, could one killer work? Sure.
Yeah.
But it would have to be like methodical type kills. Like, I wouldn't mind, like you could do one killer and it's just like Ghostface is to the point.
Yeah.
Doesn't like play with their food, right? Like,
exactly.
So like,
pare it down, make it like an old school slasher. Yeah.
Like Scream 5, in a lot of ways, I think you could have gotten away outside of like a couple points. Mm-hmm. I think you could have gotten away with there being one killer. Like if Richie was the only killer, I think you could have gotten away with that, right? Like where clearly it was only like a 40-minute drive. Maybe he drives, goes, sets up the camera, kills, somebody, right, drives back, and that's his alibi. No, I was there the whole time, like I live 40 minutes away or whatever. And then, there's all the video of Amber, whatever, and he uses that to set her up, right? Like you could have done something. Because like if you look at the kills in Scream 5, they were all quick, decisive, right? Vince was boom, and he's done.
That's it.
There was no chase scenes, right? Which is something a lot of people complained about, right? There were no chase scenes. But you can't really have chase scenes if you can, but they have to be very creative, right? Because you don't want a killer that's like teleporting. But in 5, right? You look at Wes's death, right? It was all like one kill thing. I mean, you watch that movie and you can make an argument Richie never killed anybody.
That's right.
Right. Yep. So like you could have easily explained. So they'd have to do something like that, where all the kills quick, decisive. Ghostface doesn't play around, right? There are a lot of surprise kills. Maybe Ghostface just like runs in. There's a sword on the wall, grabs the sword,
bam,
it's done.
Right.
Like there's no like if you do the like play with your food, goofy, clumsy Ghostface, then it just doesn't work.
Yeah, man, we got to stay away. We got to stay away from the goofy shit because I'm telling you, I think that at this point, we've just seen how Ghostface with the intensity. It's just again, the audience is experienced. The audience has matured. The fans have matured. So we gotta have a Ghostface that is not playing around. Like like in the bodega scene, that was really really cool. Just seeing how like cold, like it was like an icy cold Ghostface. Now, of course, when you talk about the reveal, and actually Horribee was just saying this, the reveal kind of offset that a little bit. Horribee saying, agree with Night. 3 good ones though, not as much cheese as the 6 reveal. Let's get a real reveal at the opening scene. Let Sid or Gale shoot him in the head for once right away. Yeah, we got to stay away from the cheese, man. In my opinion, I think it would be really cool if this film is, like you said, simplicity executed well. We've got a Ghostface that's not playing around. Like you can't throw like a pot of flowers at him and he flips and his legs go up in the air and all that type of stuff. He's icy, he's cold, and then we have one other. So we're going to have at least 2 or 3 Ghostface killers. That's what I think.
Yeah. I think that's the approach. Like keep the dark undertone, keep it fleshed out. Get away from. I mean, you can have like jokes and you can have like goofy moments. Yeah. I don't want it to take from like what you're trying to do, right? Like, like the reveal in Scream 6, It was goofy. It was kind of campy compared to like what they were trying to do with the overall story, right? Where they should
Yeah.
have been like, and the problem is too, they also just like destroyed a lot of their work because like that scene with Chad, it's like that was a great scene. Let that be that. But instead,
Yeah.
it's stretched away. You're just like, here we go with the goofiness again. It's like, dude, like
Right.
you had a clear established tone of this film. You had a clear pathway, and now you're deviating off of the path for what? Like why? Like you had a perfectly that was epic. That reveal was awesome. And then them in
Right.
sync, like it was like, okay, it was cool. Like let them kill Chad. You have an awesome death. Chad goes down in history as like one of the coolest scenes in the Scream franchise. But instead, you just took it all away. And it's
That's
like,
right.
and just to what? To be, again, campy, good feel, goofy. It's like, that's not what this film was. That's not what you were trying to display this film to be. Right.
Yep.
Um,
I agree.
but yeah,
Absolutely, man.
all right, real quick before we get out of here,
Yeah,
let's
we're
talk
gonna
about
wind it down.
the Stu thing. Okay. Because I know a lot of people have asked me. I get a lot
That's
of it.
right.
And we were talking about it earlier. Okay, first off, because your explanation will probably be shorter and simpler than mine. If not, go ahead, take time. I'm in no rush. But what are your thoughts on Stu? And then I'll go on my little rant.
Well, here's the thing, and it's basically kind of a rehash of what we were saying earlier. This should be a story that has simplicity. It should be
Uh-huh.
a story. We have Sydney back, so she should have weight in this story, at least at the level of 4. At least at the level of 4. And I would say, and I agree with you, I would say even though this was about Jill, and her journey, I think, that Sydney had almost as much weight. Everything kind of piggybacked towards her. So you got to have a great Sydney story. That being said, if they're going to bring him back, this might be one of the last opportunities to do it and make it make sense, because if the story is centered around her. Now, if they do it where they change the timeline, or this is after 3, or this is after 4, something like that, it's probably going to be a little less messy, like you said. If it's after 6, then some way, somehow, they're gonna have to find a way to not have any logic gaps. Because if he is, pulling strings and stuff like that in the background, then of course you run into that whole idea of, explaining about events that happen in 5 and 6. And of course, in 5 and 6, we had the core 4, and presumably we're not going to have them. So I just think that if they bring him back, I just want to make sure that it some way, somehow makes sense. I have faith,
Do you
you
want
know,
him back though? Because it's one thing. It's one thing to go like, okay, like yeah, sure, like if they
I
do. But do
at
you
this
like? Would you genuinely want that, or would you want them to just, hey, let's just go a different direction?
I think it would be really cool, because if this is Sydney, to me, I think at some point Sydney's story's got to be done.
Yeah.
It's got to be done. And I love Sydney as a character, and I love Nev, but at some point we just got to call it what it is. All these
Yeah.
people coming out of the woodwork and always trying to kill Sydney. And I know, like you said earlier, she's the trophy. It's like she's the one that always gets away. So if I can kill her, I'm going to be famous. But at some point, we just got to call it what it is and say, okay, her story is done, unless they do multiple timelines like they did with Laurie Strode. Now that makes sense, because Laurie Strode had multiple timelines, so you could pick up in different parts of her life. But if we're
She had
if we're
timelines
thinking,
where she died, timelines where she lived, timelines.
yeah, exactly. She lives, she dies, whatever. It doesn't matter, right? So with Sydney, assuming that we're going to close out her story, and if we're thinking of like tying this all together and putting a bow on it, and then leaving the door open for the franchise to have new characters and new stories from here on out, which would make sense, then I think, yeah, bringing Stu back, I'd love to see him come back, and have that final confrontation, clean up everything, and then boom, it's done. That's what I'd want to see.
All right.
Preach it, man.
There you go. I said, no, The okay, so if they were ever going to do it, now's the time.
Yeah.
If they do it now, it will never make sense to do it, right? Because like now it's just like you need the draw, you need the box office, like you kind of need to. You're kind of in this, like I mentioned earlier, you're in this rock and a hard place. Like a good way to kind of get out of that is Stu, right? Because you're gonna have people that are in the camp that are like, "Oh, this is great, yay, Stu, he's back," and then you have the people in the camp that are like, "I can't believe it. This is stupid. Why did they bring that back?" But guess what? All of those people are going to go watch the movie because
Right.
even people like myself that are like, I don't want Sue. I want them to go a different way. Guess what's going to happen? I'm still going to be curious. Like, how are they going to approach this? Is this going to be terrible? Is it going to be good? Did they make it make sense? Like, sure. And I'll give it a fair chance, right? Because like I want Scream to be good, right? I want like I'm not just making these movies or these videos just to. I didn't just all of a sudden become a sourpuss towards Scream because that was the plan all along, and I was playing the long game. In the first 2 years of me doing content, I was just like positive, just so I could switch on everybody. No, I'm just being honest. It has been rough, right? But now it's like if you were ever going to do the Stu thing, now would be the time.
Right.
I don't think that they will because again, it's so much you still have to explain. It's so convoluted. It's so like there's just however you can like if you made this the only way I see this making sense is if you made this entire movie about that. It's like it's you don't have a bunch of new characters, you know what I mean? That this movie centers around like Sydney, Gale, Mark Kincade, whomever else, right? You know, keep it adults, in my opinion. No, maybe have like a couple, like like the cult or whatever, right? Stu's operating behind the scenes, right? Because now, with the situation that they're in, they can use the entire movie to build that story of where he's been, how has he been there, how did he survive, what is the they could do flashbacks, they could use dialogue. Where if you did like say a Scream 7 and the core 4 and everybody was there, there is no way you're going to be able to build the Sydney story, build the Gale story, build the core 4 story, build the overlying story, explain Stu Macher, have Stu Macher come back, it's just you get to a point where it's just like unless this is a series and it's 10 hours of development,
right,
you're never going to be able to tell tell in a convincing way. So to me, either A, you need to make this entire film dedicated and centered around that, the Stu Macher. But if I had to guess, I don't like if I had to bet on it, I still don't think that they'll bring him back. Just because I just think again, it's still is a lot to explain. And and the thing, the biggest reason I don't think that they bring him back is because if they do, then this is the be all end all, and you're not going to be able to continue if you want. Right? So like let's say this movie is a great hit and success. Where do you go other than complete fresh restart? You can't. Right?
Yep.
Because you'd have no passing of the torch character moments. The core 4 are never coming back, so they're gone. You have no passing of the torch moments because the entire film was built around Stu and Sydney. Well, now you had Sydney's big bad come back and her take him out. Like, what else can you do? Where else can you go? I just think from a studio standpoint, unless they're looking at this as the last Hail Mary, like, let's just try to suck up as much money as revenue as possible, then I can do that. But it sounds like their intentions are to keep going, right? I mean, even when we got the Sydney news, one of the things was like, if this goes well, they're open to do more films with Sydney. How do you do that if you have Stu return and he's the big bad? But also, the longer you go, the harder it's going to be to introduce Stu. So I think in one breath, I think if you don't do it now, they're never going to do it. I think in the second breath, I think if you are going to do it, then after this, like, where do you go? Where I just think as a studio that spent 500 plus million or whatever it was to buy the rights to Scream, I understand that it was an entire catalog. It wasn't just Scream, but Scream was the big thing. Their intentions were to make 10 of these if they can, right? Like that was the goal. That was the plan. They wanted to build the Sam Tara story. They wanted to keep going, right? They had intention. They didn't have the foresight to see, one, the way that they were structuring the story, and then two, what ended up ultimately happening, right? So if their intentions are to keep pumping out films, which all indications say that it is, then because if that wasn't your intention, then why even make a Scream 7, right? Like just Scream 5 and 6 are done, you're good, give it a couple year hiatus, right? Maybe tell a whole new fresh story. But no, they're trying to, hey, let's get this. No, we need to get this out ASAP. Pay Sydney whatever you got to, or Nev whatever you have to pay her, blah, 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 right? So to me, it's clear that they want to pump out as many of these films as possible. The only way you can do that is you don't do Stu. Because if you do a Sydney-centric film with some new characters, right, you could start a whole new trilogy right now if you wanted to.
You could, yep.
You have the clean break to Sam and Tara. They're doing their thing. You just tell a whole new story, new characters, Sydney integrated, boom, and now you can go in an entire new direction. You could literally just you could start the beginning of a whole new trilogy centered around new characters, Sydney Prescott and Gale, and set up this grand storyline that leads to the end game, right? Like that.
Right.
That's what I think that they're going to do. Like I'm not saying that it'll end on a cliffhanger. I think it will have a conclusive ending, but I do think that they'll try to have the framework for them to expand if need be, or if they can. Like I don't think that they're gonna have this film be a close, cut and dry, shut, case closed type film. I think there's gonna be like, if we want to do more, right? Like there's always the ominous moment in all these films. You saw it in Scream 5, see it in Scream 6 with the mask, panning, all that. There's a lot of things that they are going to likely tie into, but anyway.
Yeah, agreed, man. I mean, it's a lot of ways they could go, and to me, that's what's exciting, is because right now we're kind of right at that doorway, of getting the information, knowing that we got Kevin on board, knowing we got Nev on board, and possibly Courtney and so forth. So that's exciting, man, and I think that it's gonna be a fun. It's going to be a fun couple of weeks, several weeks, and so forth, as we find out more and more. And then all of these theories, that's the thing that's really going to be cool. But you know what else is cool? We have a channel member anniversary for Carrie. Carrie, 3 months. Thank you so much, Carrie. Saying, I'm beyond excited to see Kevin as the director. Wish he was writing too, but they still have promised 3 months. Woohoo! Love to the Lethal Collective. Thank you so much, Carrie. We appreciate you. Awesome. Seriously.
Yeah. Seriously.
Awesome.
You're
awesome.
Care Bear.
She is. All right, guys. Well, look, we're going to get ready to wind down here. We appreciate all of you guys for being here, and some great conversation and great theories from you guys in the live chat. We did see you guys. So definitely leave us some comments, continue the discussion as a community. As always, we appreciate you. If you haven't hit the like button, also make sure you do that. It would also help us out, help the stream and so forth. So we will catch you guys next time. And as always, the collective has spoken. Peace.